In Chapter 9 of Proteinaholic, what did you mean by diabetes? It's the meat that makes you sweet.
Yeah. In my chapter on diabetes, the meat that makes you sweet, this is, to me, one of the biggest misunderstandings in nutritional science, is the idea that carbohydrates cause diabetes. Carbohydrates do not cause diabetes. They exacerbate diabetes. They make diabetes worse. The cause is the inability to process the carbohydrate. We are built, every part of our body is built to eat carbs. We have amylase in our saliva to break down the carbohydrate. We have insulin to put the carbohydrate into our cells. Our cells process the carbohydrate into energy. We store excess carbohydrates, glycogen. We are carb-eating machines until you eat too much saturated fat and animal protein. Then saturated fat gets into the muscle cells, and the muscle cells are where most of the carbohydrate breakdown and utilization is done. Fat gets into those muscle cells, and now you can't produce insulin receptors. Well, insulin receptors are the lock and key to get carbs into the cell. So if the insulin receptors aren't working, you can't get the carbohydrate into the cell. You eat carbohydrate, your blood sugar goes up, you're like, oh, it's the carbohydrate's fault. It's not the carbohydrate's fault. Yes, it's a problem that the blood sugar's up. Yes, if you eat less carbs, your carbohydrate level will drop, but that's not fixing the problem. That's putting Band-Aids on a solution.
In Chapter 10 of Proteinaholic, what did you mean by hypertension? Protein puts us under pressure.
Yeah, my chapter with hypertension, hypertension is a huge problem in America, a huge problem. We have really an epidemic of hypertension. It's not really spoken about much because we throw medicines at it. And the medicines do control the hypertension. Before medicines, people died of hypertensive disease. We're still dying of hypertensive disease because it's an independent risk factor for heart disease. I don't think we think much about the dietary causes of heart disease, or if we do, we think it's all salt. But when you look at the research, there's a lot of research that supports the idea that a plant-based diet is excellent for hypertension. And there's many reasons why that may be. One of them may actually be looking at the differences, what I call the thumbprint of animal protein versus plant protein. Plant protein has a lot more glutamic acid than animal protein. That glutamic acid gets converted to glutathione, which is a very strong antioxidant, and has a very strong antihypertensive effect. And it may be that plant protein and increased plant proteins get you more glutamic acid and gets you this effect. It may have to do with saturated fats. It may have to do with the constriction of blood vessels when you eat animal protein and animal foods. But we know with several studies that I cite in the book that a plant-based diet does a very good job for hypertension.
In Chapter 11 of Proteinaholic, what did you mean by heart disease? Skip the meat, keep the beat.
Heart disease is one place where we definitely see that animal protein has a negative effect and that plant protein has a positive effect. Years ago, Ansel Keys had his 7-country study, which was the groundbreaking study that said that saturated fat causes heart disease. He was basically at that time, this was a topic that really generated a lot of arguments. And there were 2 researchers, Yerselny and Hillebo, and they came up with a 22-country study to show that it wasn't fat. And in that study, they showed it wasn't fat that caused heart disease. But if you look at that study really closely, what they found did cause heart disease was animal protein. What causes heart disease is very complex. There are multiple factors that go into that. We know that there is a problem with the endothelium, which is the lining of the vessels. As soon as you get a break in that endothelium, which is usually flow related, so high blood pressure, for instance, or a constriction of the blood vessel, which we know we get with animal protein products because they interfere with your body to make nitrous oxide, which dilates blood vessels. So if I give you animal foods and I check your brachial artery to see how it relaxes, it doesn't relax after an animal-based meal. That higher flow through a tighter tube could make shear forces on the what's called endothelium or lining of the vessels. That allows an inflammatory reaction in that spot. It allows apoproteins, which are these proteins that have cholesterol, to get into the endothelium. Macrophages come up and grab them. Now you start developing a plaque. You get a plaque, you start having heart disease. So there's many steps towards developing heart disease. Animal protein seems to play a part in all of those. And this is one disease where we have got amazing research, whether it's epidemiologic research, EPIC data study, Adventist health study showing that plant-based eaters have less heart disease, or whether it's a randomized controlled trial like Dean Ornish, who showed that you could actually reverse this plaque, which is really revolutionary. We thought that you could maybe stop the plaque from getting worse, but reversing the plaque we did not know you could do, and he showed you could do that with a plant-based diet. And we have mechanistic studies that show why a plant-based diet works. So this is the one disease process where we have a lot of literature to show that a plant-based diet is excellent for cardiovascular health.